Marcus preferred the company of dead men. Their thoughts, meticulously preserved in vellum and brittle paper, offered a more predictable solace than the unpredictable chaos of the living. His London flat, a fortress of monographs and historical journals, rarely saw the light of day, its windows perpetually draped against the city's insistent hum. He was a historian, precise and analytical, his mind a labyrinth of documented facts and verifiable timelines. Speculation held no currency, superstition even less. The arrival of the letter, thick and cream-colored, had been an unwelcome disruption. It bore no postmark Marcus recognized, only an embossed crest, faded and unfamiliar. Inside, the solicitor's prose was equally stiff, informing him of the unexpected passing of a distant, forgotten relative. A great aunt he'd never met, barely even heard mentioned. And with her death, the inheritance. Blackwood Manor. Marcus had scoffed. A manor? He pictured a drafty, crumbling edifice, a financial drain. He had no interest in inherited burdens, especially not one situated in some forgotten corner of the English countryside, miles from any decent archive. The solicitor's follow-up call, however, had been more insistent. A significant estate, Marcus, with a certain reputation. The solicitor's voice had lowered then, almost conspiratorial. Local legends, you understand. Nothing to trouble a man of your academic disposition. That phrase, local legends, had piqued Marcus's interest, purely as an anthropological curiosity. He'd done a cursory search. The results were a patchwork of sensationalized local news clippings and forum posts discussing the whispering house, the house that watches, and the place where memories bleed. Marcus had dismissed it all as rural folklore, the product of isolated communities and overactive imaginations. He saw only an opportunity to observe a peculiar cultural phenomenon firsthand, to perhaps even debunk it. He would survey the property, arrange its sale, and return to his quiet, ordered life. This was simply another historical artifact, albeit a large, inconvenient one, waiting to be catalogued and disposed of. The journey itself was a descent into increasing isolation. The train had dwindled from bustling carriages to near-empty compartments, depositing him at a station that smelled of damp earth and forgotten industry. A hired car, driven by a taciturn local, navigated increasingly narrow, overgrown lanes. The landscape grew desolate, fields giving way to tangled thickets and skeletal trees. The sky pressed down, a uniform gray blanket, mirroring the oppressive silence inside the vehicle. They passed through a village that seemed to be slowly rejoining the soil. Crumbling stone cottages, their windows like vacant eyes, lined the main street. A sign, half-rotted, proclaimed the Golden Plough Inn, its timbers sagging. Further on, a structure Marcus recognized from his brief research, the old cinema, stood like a forgotten sentinel. Its Art Deco facade, once vibrant, was now peeling, a single broken marquee light hanging precariously. The double doors were boarded shut, posters from decades past clinging to the walls like faded ghosts. He noted the way the driver's grip tightened on the wheel as they passed it, a subtle tremor that Marcus logged as another data point for his local superstition theory. Finally, the car turned onto a private drive, a tunnel of ancient, gnarled oaks that met overhead, plunging the afternoon into a premature twilight. The gravel crunched under the tires, the only sound for what felt like miles. Then, Blackwood Manor materialized through the gloom. 3 stories tall, with a host of dormer windows like watchful eyes, it seemed to have grown organically from the very earth, rather than been built upon it. The roofline sagged in places, a testament to its age, but the overall impression was one of formidable, unyielding permanence. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, wrestled with the stone, its tendrils reaching into every crevice, threatening to swallow the house whole. There was no welcoming porch, no inviting entrance, only a massive oak door studded with black iron, that looked more like the portal to a crypt than a home. He attributed it to the sheer scale of the place, the overwhelming sense of its history. He pushed down the faint unease, reminding himself that this was merely a structure, a collection of materials, subject to the laws of physics and decay. Nothing more. The driver, after pulling up to the overgrown gravel turnaround, killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, profound. "He's quite something, isn't he?" the driver murmured, his gaze fixed on the manor, not on Marcus. There was a tremor in his voice that Marcus did not miss. "Indeed," Marcus replied, his voice sounding thin in the vast quiet. He retrieved his single, sensible suitcase from the boot. Marcus stood alone before the manor, a solitary figure dwarfed by its imposing presence. The air around him felt denser, older. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the stone itself, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated deep within his bones. He told himself it was the wind, the settling of old timbers, but the air was utterly still. He climbed the 3 wide, moss-slick steps to the massive oak door. No doorbell. He found a heavy iron knocker, shaped like a grotesque, snarling face, and let it fall. He waited. No one came. Of course not. He had the key, a formidable, tarnished brass object he'd found tucked into the solicitor's envelope. With a determined sigh, Marcus inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a groan of ancient metal, a sound that seemed to awaken something deep within the manor's slumber. He pushed the door open. A wave of frigid, stagnant air, heavy with the scent of dust, damp stone, and something indefinable. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like forgotten blood, washed over him. The interior was a cavern of gloom. Marcus stepped inside, the sole of his boot scuffing against a thick layer of dust. Marcus approached the grand, dust-shrouded library with a sense of methodical purpose. The previous chapter's cursory online search, revealing snippets about the Whispering House and the place where Memoir, had been filed away under local curiosities. An interesting, if irrelevant, anthropological footnote to his primary objective. He was here for history, for the tangible records of human endeavor, not the spectral echoes of folklore. The room itself was a cavernous space, lined with empty shelves that soared towards a vaulted ceiling. A faint scent of ancient paper and dormant wood permeated the air. A smell he found comforting, like stepping into a forgotten archive. He designated the vast oak table in the center as his primary workspace. Boxes, heavy with his meticulously organized research, were already stacked along one wall, each labeled with the precision of a cartographer. He began the arduous task of unpacking. Volumes on regional architecture, local land deeds, genealogical charts of the area's founding families, and his own extensive notes on the socioeconomic impact of the 18th century industrial boom. Each book, each document was a piece of a grand puzzle, and Marcus, the historian, was the only one capable of assembling it. He worked with a quiet intensity, his movements efficient, his thoughts already dissecting potential correlations between a particular family's decline and a shift in trade routes. A sudden chill, sharp and localized, prickled the hairs on his forearms. It was distinct, a pocket of Arctic air in the otherwise still room. Marcus paused, his hand hovering over a box of parliamentary records. He glanced towards the tall, mullioned windows. Old houses, he reasoned, were notorious for drafts. He made a mental note to inspect the window seals later, attributing the sensation to the manor's age and inevitable structural imperfections. Later, as twilight bled through the stained glass, casting fractured patterns across the floor, Marcus was arranging a stack of fragile parchment deeds. It was a rustle, like dry leaves skittering across stone, followed by a barely audible murmur. He stopped, tilting his head. The sound was elusive, amorphous. The manor was a vast, creaking vessel, and he was simply attuned to its various groans and sighs. His rational mind swiftly cataloged the incident, filing it under environmental noise. He worked until the light grew too dim, his eyes straining. Reaching for his reading spectacles, he found the designated leather case empty. He distinctly remembered placing them on the corner of the oak table, next to his fountain pen. He frowned. Perhaps he'd been more tired than he thought. He checked his coat pockets, then the top of a nearby bookshelf, his irritation growing. Finally, he spotted them. Not on the table, but perched precariously on a stack of unopened boxes, several feet away, almost hidden by a coil of packing twine. He stared at them for a long moment, a flicker of something unidentifiable brushing against his usual composure. It was an odd place to leave them, certainly, but he dismissed it as a momentary lapse, a consequence of his focused work. His mind, he reminded himself, was a finely tuned instrument, but even instruments could have minor, temporary malfunctions. The following days settled into a similar rhythm. Marcus would spend hours immersed in his research, sifting through documents, cross-referencing names, building a meticulous timeline of the manor's human history. The subtle phenomena, however, persisted. He'd pause, listen intently, then invariably dismiss it as auditory pareidolia, the mind's tendency to find patterns in noise. He was alone in a large, old house. It was natural for his senses to be hyper-alert, to interpret the mundane as something more. It wasn't a secret passage, merely a small, dusty recess. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowed linen, lay a collection of leather-bound journals, their covers cracked and warped with age. They were not official records, but personal diaries, written in various hands, spanning generations. He carefully extracted the first one, its pages like delicate autumn leaves. The handwriting was florid, from the mid-1800s. The entries began innocently enough, detailing daily life, social calls, the weather. But as he turned the pages, a shift occurred. The tone grew more anxious, the script more erratic. The air here, it thickens. My thoughts are not my own. Marcus, find myself forgetting simple truths, like the color of my wife's eyes, or the name of my own firstborn. It steals. He chalked it up to the evocative power of the writing, a testament to the author's psychological state. He moved to another journal, this one from the early 20th century. The hand was sharper, more desperate. The House Watches. Marcus have seen it, not with eyes, but with a presence that sinks into the very marrow of my bones. It distorts the past. Marcus remembered vividly attending the opening night of the old cinema, the excitement, the flickering images. Now the memory is tainted, twisted, but it cannot be. Marcus was with my beloved. Marcus's fingers tightened on the fragile binding. The mention of the old cinema was a curious detail, a specific, tangible place in the outside world, yet depicted through a lens of profound mental distress. He read on, his historian's objectivity warring with a growing sense of disquiet. The entries grew more fragmented, less coherent. The faces in the portraits, they shift. Their eyes follow. My memories. They are no longer mine. They are the house's harvest. I am fading. He closed the journal, the scent of ancient paper now laced with something less comforting, something like dust and decay. These were not mere ramblings of the mentally infirm. The consistency across generations, the similar themes of memory loss and a malevolent, sentient presence began to chip away at Marcus's carefully constructed wall of rationalization. Marcus, despite the unsettling conclusions of the previous night, clung to his academic rigor. The journals, he reasoned, were merely anecdotal evidence, susceptible to interpretation. He would approach this like any other historical puzzle, systematically. His determination, however, felt less like a scholar's conviction and more like a barrier against a creeping apprehension. The silence of the manor, once a comforting blanket of solitude, now felt like a held breath. He would pause, straining, but the sounds would dissipate, leaving only the profound quiet. He dismissed them as auditory tricks, the natural consequence of heightened awareness in an unfamiliar old structure. Yet, the dismissals grew less convincing with each passing hour. One afternoon, while examining a brittle land deed in the library, a shadow detached itself from the heavy velvet curtain by the tall window. Marcus blinked, his breath catching. He rubbed his eyes, attributing it to fatigue, to the strain of deciphering faded script. Sleep offered no refuge. Nightmares descended, vivid and suffocating. He found himself trapped within the manor, but it was a shifting, labyrinthine version, its walls breathing, its corridors twisting into impossible angles. The first few nights he'd rationalized them as stress-induced. Now, the persistent imagery of the manor itself as a living, hungry entity was becoming harder to shake. The journals had provided a starting point. Now he sought corroboration. He consulted the manor's archives, dusty ledgers, and fragmented correspondence he found tucked away in forgotten chests. He also made a point of visiting the local town's public records, housed in what was once an old cinema, its grand marquee now faded and peeling, the concession stand replaced by filing cabinets. The air inside smelled of mildew and forgotten popcorn. He spent hours poring over birth certificates, death records, property transfers, and local newspaper clippings. The manor had a history of attracting individuals drawn to its isolation. Scholars, artists, reclusive gentry. Each period of extended habitation seemed to end similarly. There was the naturalist, Elias Thorne, who, in 1887, documented his descent into profound melancholy before vanishing without a trace, leaving only a half-finished manuscript filled with increasingly erratic observations about the speaking stones of the house. A decade later, the widowed socialite, Eleanor Vance, inherited the property. Her personal letters, retrieved from a damp box, chronicled a gradual onset of memory loss, a growing paranoia that the house watches, culminating in her discovery, lifeless in the grand foyer, a single ornate letter opener clutched in her hand. The coroner's report, a terse document, ruled it a self-inflicted wound. Then there was the architect, Alistair Finch, who purchased the manor in the 1930s with ambitious renovation plans. His meticulous blueprints gradually gave way to frantic scribbled notes about shifting dimensions and echoes of lives not his own. His final entry, dated precisely 6 months after his arrival, spoke of an unbearable hunger emanating from the very foundations. He was found, a week later, wandering the local moorlands, incoherent and emaciated, his mind irrevocably fractured. A tragic end, madness, disappearance, suicide. The common thread was not merely the house, but the prolonged solitude within its walls. He sat amidst the musty archives of the old cinema, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the brittle documents. His hand trembled slightly as he closed a folder detailing the Finch incident. The clinical detachment he had prided himself on was eroding, crumbling under the weight of undeniable repeated catastrophe. These were not mere ramblings. They were the house, beginning its work. The common thread was no longer coincidence. It was a pattern, an inescapable design woven through the fabric of the manor's past. Marcus leaned back from the stacks of crumbling documents, the scent of aged paper and dust clinging to his nostrils. He had dismissed them as the melancholic narratives of fragile minds, perhaps exacerbated by the manor's inherent solitude, but the sheer consistency now gnawed at his resolve. His historian's mind, accustomed to dissecting facts and rationalizing anomalies, found itself confronting an entity that defied logic. A cold draft snaked around his ankles, though every window in the study was latched shut. He shivered, pulling his cardigan tighter. He was tracing the faded patterns on a silk tapestry, attempting to anchor himself in the tangible when the air thickened. The familiar scent of old wood and beeswax was abruptly overlaid by something else. Stale popcorn and damp velvet, a smell utterly alien to the manor. He frowned, inhaling deeply. It was unmistakable, and it brought with it a faint, cloying sweetness that made his stomach churn. Then, the light began to dim, not gradually as the sun set, but as if a heavy curtain had been drawn across a projection. The ornate plasterwork of the ceiling seemed to ripple, its gilded edges blurring. The walls, once covered in deep, patterned wallpaper, shimmered and transformed. Marcus stared, his breath catching in his throat. The wallpaper peeled back, not physically, but visually, revealing rows of plush crimson seating. The tapestry he had just touched now hung as a tattered screen, a faint, flickering light emanating from its center. He was standing in an old cinema. The transformation was absolute, seamless, yet utterly impossible. The drawing room had vanished, replaced by an auditorium, albeit a derelict one. Dust motes danced in the projector's weak beam, illuminating the ghostly outlines of figures in the seats. He could hear the rustle of clothing, the quiet murmurs of a long-past audience. A clatter of film reels, tinny and distant, echoed from what must have been the projection booth high above. The air grew heavy with unspoken anticipation, a collective breath held. Marcus felt a profound disorientation. He was no longer merely observing, he was within the vision. He could almost feel the warmth of their bodies beside him, the brush of a sleeve against his arm. He tried to move, to back away, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. A high-pitched, keening sound, like a child's sob, tore through the ambient noise. It was raw, filled with an ancient grief. The figures in the seats stirred, their heads turning in unison towards the source of the sound, though their faces remained obscured. Marcus felt an intense wave of sorrow wash over him. Not his own, but something absorbed, projected directly into his consciousness. It was a memory, he realized with a sickening lurch, a memory of profound suffering, replayed within the very structure of the house. The manor was not just haunted, it was a vast, sentient archive of pain. The keening grew louder, more desperate. He felt a pressure building in his skull, as if the sheer weight of these past emotions was trying to force its way into his mind. He wanted to scream, to break free, but his voice was trapped. Then, as abruptly as it began, the vision fractured. The smell of popcorn and damp velvet dissipated, replaced by the familiar aroma of old paper and dust. The crimson seats dissolved into the patterned wallpaper. The flickering screen solidified back into the ancient tapestry. Marcus found himself trembling, leaning heavily against a marble fireplace that had been utterly absent from his vision. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, overwhelming quiet. The historian's skepticism, once a sturdy shield, had been utterly shattered. He had not merely imagined this. He had experienced it. The feeling of being watched intensified, no longer a fleeting impression, but a concrete certainty. It was not the gaze of a single spectral entity, but something vast, pervasive, and utterly malevolent. It was as if the very walls had eyes, not to see, but to absorb. The manor was not merely replaying its traumatic memories, it was actively sharing them, forcing him to become a part of its endless, agonizing narrative. He was no longer an observer. Marcus sat amidst his accumulated research, the piles of documents forming irregular ramparts around him. He had seen it in the precise language of the lawyer's notes regarding the deceased, in the frantic, eroding script of the former owner's journal. His own existence had begun to mirror these narratives with an unsettling fidelity. Days bled into one another, marked less by the passage of time and more by the subtle shifts in the manor's oppressive atmosphere. His meticulous routines, once a source of quiet satisfaction, had unraveled. Meals were forgotten or cobbled together from whatever stale provisions remained. The crisp shirts he'd packed lay untouched in his trunk, replaced by the same few garments, now wrinkled and carrying the subtle, pervasive odor of aged stone and disuse. He had attempted to reach out. The first few calls to the estate agent had been met with a crackling line, and then a dead silence. He tried again, dialing the number for a colleague, a specialist in historical architecture who might appreciate his findings. Emails, sent with increasing desperation, vanished into the ether. He watched his outbox, hoping for a confirmation, a bounce back, anything. Nothing. It was as if the manor itself had severed the invisible threads connecting him to the world beyond its walls. A peculiar inertia had settled upon him. The thought of leaving, of stepping beyond the threshold, felt increasingly abstract. It wasn't fear, not precisely, but a profound disinclination. A sense that his true work, his only purpose, lay within these walls. The manor, in its vast, silent expanse, seemed to exert a gravitational pull, heavy and undeniable. This pull was not entirely unpleasant. There was a peculiar comfort in the manor's omnipresent gloom, a strange, almost maternal embrace in its suffocating quiet. The house knew him, understood him, in a way no outside entity ever could. It was an intimacy forged in isolation, a bond that felt both possessive and strangely protective. One afternoon, a vivid, unbidden image flashed through his mind. The marquee of an old cinema, its chipped paint peeling, the letters for a forgotten matinee flickering erratically in the twilight. He remembered the sticky floors, the velvet seats, the shared laughter of a Friday night crowd. A pang, sharp and fleeting, pierced through the strange contentment. It was a memory of a world he had once inhabited, a world of casual connection and communal experience, now utterly alien. He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw, the stubble rough against his fingertips. His eyes, reflected in a tarnished mirror, seemed sunken, the whites slightly yellowed. He barely recognized the gaunt face staring back. It was not merely physical neglect. It was a deeper erosion of will. The urge to eat, to sleep regularly, to maintain his appearance, had receded, replaced by a singular focus on the house. Its history, its secrets, its very being had become his consuming obsession. He no longer questioned the manor's malevolence. He merely accepted it, and in a way, welcomed it. The isolation was no longer a burden. It was a necessity. The house demanded his full attention, and he was, with each passing hour, more willing to give it. The common thread was no longer coincidence. It was a pattern, an inescapable design woven through time, an insidious architecture of despair. Marcus traced the lines of a faded diagram, his finger lingering on a name. Elias Thorne. The name had appeared with chilling regularity across the centuries, always connected to the manor, always preceding a documented disappearance or a descent into madness. The manor did not merely witness these events, it orchestrated them. A peculiar shift had occurred. Confusion rippled through him. The window, he was certain, faced west. Now it faced nothing. A tremor of unease snaked through his resolve. He turned, the room feeling subtly different. The fireplace, typically on the north wall, now occupied the east. His books, painstakingly arranged, were in disarray, volumes scattered across the floor as if a sudden gust had swept through. Yet the air was still, heavy with the scent of aged paper and something else, something metallic and faintly damp like deep earth. He attempted to retrace his steps, to find the grand staircase, but the corridor he entered was unfamiliar. The wallpaper, a peeling floral pattern he'd never seen, stretched into an unnatural distance. It was a low, resonant hum, like a distant, massive engine, or perhaps a heart beating within stone. He was Marcus, a historian, grounded in facts, in logic. He knew his own house. The corridor twisted, turned, then opened into a vast, unexpected chamber. Rows of velvet seats, many ripped and stained, faced a massive, moth-eaten screen. The air here was thick with the smell of stale popcorn, mildew, and something acrid, like old ozone. He had never known this room existed. The manor was large, yes, but he had explored every wing, every floor, every hidden passage he could find in his initial weeks. This cavernous space, complete with a projector booth perched high above the seating, felt impossible. It was too grand, too out of place. He walked down the sloped aisle, his footsteps muffled by the decaying carpet. The seats felt strangely yielding, as if recently occupied. He ran a hand over the velvet, and a faint warmth lingered, an impression of a body having just departed. He found himself sitting in one of the middle rows, his gaze fixed on the screen. Then, a flicker. Not on the screen, but in his mind. A memory that wasn't his. He was weeping, her voice a silent shriek. "It shows me everything," he thought. Every moment of his despair, every scream. Marcus gasped, pushing himself up, the phantom memory jarring him. He was Marcus. This was his house. But the woman's fear, her utter desolation, had been so vivid, so real. He stumbled towards the projector booth, driven by an irrational need to understand. The stairs creaked under his weight. Inside the booth, a single projector stood, ancient and formidable, a reel of film already threaded. The lens, however, felt warm, almost hot. He peered through it, expecting to see dust, or perhaps the blank screen. Instead, he saw a flickering image. Not a film, but a corridor, winding and endless, its walls shifting, its doors dissolving and reforming. It was the corridor he had just traversed. He saw himself in the image, a small, confused figure, moving through a space that seemed to actively reshape itself around him. He watched himself from a detached, clinical distance, growing increasingly frantic. Then, the figure on the screen turned, its face blurring, its features morphing. It wasn't Marcus anymore. Elias Thorne. A wave of nausea washed over Marcus. He wasn't watching a film. He was watching a memory, or perhaps a projection of his own dissolving reality. The man on the screen, Elias Thorne, looked up, directly into the lens, directly at Marcus. He looked down at his hands. Were these his hands? The skin seemed a little more translucent, the veins a little more prominent than he remembered. A subtle tremor ran through them. The manor groaned around him, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from its very foundations. The walls of the projector booth seemed to press inward, the air growing heavy, thick. It was not merely shifting its layout, it was shifting him. His memories, his perceptions, his very sense of self were being devoured, replaced by the echoes of those who had come before. He was becoming a vessel, another chapter in the manor's endless, labyrinthine narrative of consumption. The old cinema, he realized, was not just a room. It was a stage, and he was the unwilling, dissolving actor in a play he could not escape. The projector's whirring became a drill bit in Marcus's skull. Elias Thorne's silent scream, his eyes locked on Marcus through the flickering screen, had dissolved the last vestiges of Marcus's academic detachment. He wasn't merely an observer of history. He was a participant, an unwilling witness to a past that bled into his present. The air in the old cinema, thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and stale popcorn, suddenly felt heavy, pressing in on his chest. A cold sweat slicked his palms. He forced himself to stay seated, his fingers digging into the worn velvet of the armrest. His mind, trained for decades to analyze and dissect, scrambled for a rational explanation. A hallucination? A trick of the light, exacerbated by the manor's oppressive atmosphere? The image on the screen wavered, then shifted. Thorne was gone. Now, fragmented scenes flickered, a montage of disjointed moments. He saw a woman, her face etched with a desperate weariness, wandering through the manor's library, her hands tracing the spines of books without focus. Another, a young boy, his laughter fading, his vibrant clothes turning muted, his movements slowing to a near standstill as he stood in the grand foyer. He had seen these figures before, or fragments of them, in his own disorienting visions. The manor itself featured prominently in these vignettes. It wasn't just a backdrop, it was an active participant. A strange, almost imperceptible pulse emanated from the very structure. A slow, rhythmic thrumming that Marcus felt more than heard. A vibration through the floorboards, up through his seat, into his bones. The man in the drawing room dissolved entirely, not violently, but gently, like an old photograph left in water, his edges softening, his color draining, until only a faint outline remained, and then nothing. The images were silent, yet Marcus heard the echoes of lost thoughts, forgotten names, the quiet erosion of identity. He saw memories, not just of the people, but from them, swirling like dust motes in the air, then drawn inexorably towards the manor's stone. The manor was not merely haunted by these specters. It had created them. It had consumed them. This was no ordinary haunting, no residual energy of past tragedies. This was a deliberate, active process. The manor wasn't just a place. It was an entity. A predator. It fed. He saw the pattern now, undeniable, horrific. Each person who had lived within its walls, each person whose story Marcus had meticulously researched, had met the same fate. They had come vibrant and whole, and left as husks, or simply vanished, their essence absorbed. The manor grew stronger, more resonant, more alive with each consumption. Its ancient stones hummed with the stolen vitality of generations. Marcus felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. They were the early stages of digestion. He was not merely studying the manor's victims. He was becoming one of them. He was its current meal. His own thoughts, once sharp and precise, now felt like grains of sand sifting through his fingers. He had come here, a skeptical historian, determined to unravel its secrets, to expose the superstition. And in his arrogance, he had walked directly into the maw of something ancient, something that had waited patiently for a fresh, rich source of sustenance. The screen flickered one last time, dissolving the montage of victims into a single, terrifying image. The manor, Blackwood Manor itself. But it wasn't static. The old stone walls seemed to breathe, a subtle expansion and contraction, like a dormant beast inhaling. And within that light, Marcus saw a reflection. His own. Distorted, fading, already half-consumed. He wasn't just watching a film. He was watching his own demise, projected by the very thing that was actively dismantling him. He was not merely trapped within its walls. He was being systematically, patiently devoured. And the manor, ancient and malevolent, waited for him to fade. The projector's whirring still echoed, a phantom drill bit in Marcus's skull, though the machine itself had long since fallen silent. He wasn't merely an observer of history. He was a participant, an unwilling witness to a horror that had devoured countless others. A cold, hard knot of terror solidified in his gut, but beneath it, a tiny, furious spark ignited. He would not become another forgotten name in the manor's archives. He stood in the old cinema, the air thick and stale, smelling of dust, decaying velvet, and something metallic, like old blood. The rows of seats, shrouded in grimy canvas, stretched into the oppressive gloom, each one a silent spectator to his unraveling. The projector, a hulking iron beast, squatted on its pedestal, its lens a dead, unblinking eye. Marcus felt the house's presence pressing in, a crushing weight against his temples, attempting to reassert its control, to lull his back into the comforting stupor of its manufactured past. Memories, not his own, flickered at the edges of his vision. A woman's laugh, the clink of teacups, a child sobbing, all fragmented and distorted, swirling like motes in the projector's absent beam. "No," he rasped, the word tasting like rust on his tongue. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, forcing the intrusive images away. His own name, his own life, his own purpose. He clung to them like a drowning man to a spar. He was Marcus. He was a historian. If the manor fed on memory and life, then perhaps there was a way to starve it, or even wound it. He had been looking for explanations, for rationalizations. Now he sought a weapon. His gaze swept across the derelict room, no longer seeing it as a relic, but as a potential battleground. The house had shown him its past, its victims. Had any of them fought back? Had any left a sign, a clue, a last desperate act of defiance? He moved with a sudden, frantic urgency, his hands running over the backs of the seats, the peeling wallpaper, the dusty baseboards. The floorboards groaned under his weight, a sound that seemed to emanate from the house itself, a low, unhappy rumble. He approached the projector again, its cold metal surface offering no answers. He checked the film canisters, their labels faded and brittle, containing only the mundane recordings the house had used to weave its illusions. Nothing. His fingers traced the edge of the screen, a vast expanse of stained fabric that seemed to pulse with faint, lingering light. He knew the house was everywhere, its influence woven into the very fabric of the structure. Then, his fingers brushed against something odd at the base of the projector stand. Not the rough texture of corroded iron, but something smoother, set slightly askew. He knelt, scraping away decades of dust and grime with his fingernails. Beneath a thin layer of plaster, a small, almost invisible seam became apparent. A hidden compartment. The temperature in the cinema seemed to drop several degrees, and a faint, acrid smell, like ozone mixed with burning hair, prickled his nostrils. The house was aware. It was resisting his probing. With a grunt, Marcus managed to pry open the small panel. It revealed a shallow cavity, barely large enough to conceal a single item. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and fine, powdery dust, lay a leather-bound journal. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly. The journal was old, its pages yellowed and brittle. He opened it carefully, the spine groaning in protest. The script inside was elegant but faded, written in a hand he recognized. Elias Thorne's. His eyes scanned the first few lines, his breath catching in his throat. Elias Thorne had not simply succumbed. He had fought. He had understood. But then, a shift. Thorne had begun to perceive patterns, not just random occurrences. He wrote of the house's feedings, its rhythmic absorption of energy, and its apparent vulnerability. "It draws its strength from the unmoored," Marcus read aloud, his voice hoarse. "From the lost, the forgotten, the souls unanchored by memory or purpose." Thorne had speculated that the house's power was tied to the very concept of permanence, its ability to retain and corrupt all that entered it. Then, a page filled with frantic, almost illegible scrawl. Thorne had discovered a counterforce. Not a weapon, but a disruption. A ritual of unmaking. He spoke of specific sigils, etched not into the house itself, but into objects meant to be carried away. Objects that represented a definitive break, a permanent exodus. On the final page, a crudely drawn diagram. A complex interlocking symbol surrounded by smaller, repeating patterns. It was a way to starve it, to sever its connection to its victims, perhaps even to render it dormant. But what was the artifact? Thorne hadn't specified. His final entry ended abruptly, a smear of ink, as if he had been interrupted. The air in the old cinema grew heavy, pressing down on him. A low, guttural moan seemed to even vibrate from the very walls, a sound of immense, ancient displeasure. The house knew he had found something. It was fighting back, no longer with subtle illusions, but with raw, malevolent force. Marcus clutched the journal, his knuckles white. The information was terrifying, incomplete, and offered no guarantee of success. But it was a lead, a direction, a terrifying glimmer of resistance in the face of absolute despair. The question remained: what was the artifact, and how could he possibly remove it from a sentient entity that was actively trying to consume him? He had to find it. He had to try. A cold, unyielding resolve settled in Marcus's chest. The diagram, Thorne's final desperate attempt at an answer, had solidified a truth he'd fought to deny. The house was a living, predatory entity. His task was no longer to merely understand, but to starve it, to sever its connections. He sought the hidden spaces, the forgotten conduits, the places where the house's tendrils might anchor deepest. The wooden steps groaned beneath his weight, but the sounds felt unnaturally amplified, a deliberate vocalization from the structure itself. A door at the bottom, which he knew to be latched, slammed shut with a concussive force that rattled the very stones. Marcus paused, his breath held. This was a warning. He tried the handle, finding it locked, the wood solid and unyielding. The lock, previously rusted and fragile, now felt impossibly secure. He turned, finding another passage, one he'd used just moments before, now seemingly sealed by a sudden collapse of brick and mortar. He touched the rough, fresh debris. It wasn't old. The house was fighting back, actively reshaping itself to impede him. He found an alternate route through a disused scullery, its copper pots tarnished black, its flagstones slick with an unseen moisture. It didn't connect physically, but the icy shock of its passage through his arm left a burning ache, a phantom bruise on his skin. He pressed on, his determination hardening into a desperate urgency. The house intensified its assault. Visions, once fleeting and fragmented, now solidified into terrifyingly real experiences. The air was thick with the scent of stale popcorn and dust, a sickly sweet decay clinging to everything. Rows of velvet seats, ripped and stained, stretched into the gloom, facing a screen that flickered with a faint internal light. On the screen, images began to play. A loop of silent, black and white footage depicting the manor's previous inhabitants. Marcus watched, transfixed by the horror. A young woman, a former governess he'd read about, stood smiling. Then, subtly, her smile faltered, her eyes darted, her posture slumped. Her memories, her essence seemed to drain from her on screen, a slow, agonizing theft. He heard her faint, whimpering cries, not from the screen, but from the empty seats around him, a chorus of despair. It wanted to break his will, to make him one of them. He knew this was an illusion, a sophisticated construct of the house's malevolence, yet its reality was absolute. He fought against the creeping paralysis, the urge to sink into a seat and watch, to let the visions consume him. He remembered Thorne's diagram, the lines drawn to sever. The artifact. He forced his eyes away from the screen, scanning the decaying space. The house wanted him to be a spectator, a victim, but he was here for a purpose. He moved down the aisle, his boots crunching on unseen debris. Behind the flickering screen, where the projector room should have been, Marcus found a small, hidden alcove, barely visible through the warped wooden panels. It wasn't part of the cinema's original structure. It was a deliberate concealment. He tore at the rotted wood, splinters digging into his fingers. Behind it, nestled in a niche carved from the stone, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was plain, unadorned, utterly unremarkable save for the faint, resonant hum it emitted. This was it. Not a grand, powerful totem, but a simple, personal object, steeped in some profound, agonizing memory. The house had shown him its heart. Now it would fight to the death to keep it. The rough-hewn steps, worn smooth in their centers, spiraled downwards into an increasing gloom that swallowed the faint light filtering from above. Marcus gripped the clammy, moss-furred stone banister, his knuckles white. The cold seeped into his bones, a deliberate chill that felt less like temperature and more like a presence. Each creak of the old wood, each scuttling sound in the unseen depths, seemed to resonate within his own skull, not merely heard, but felt. He knew he was close. The walls of the stairwell began to weep, not water, but a viscous, dark fluid that shimmered faintly in the oppressive dimness. It smelled of decay and something indefinable. A sweet, sickly aroma that hinted at long-dead things and stolen vitality. Marcus pressed on, his jaw tight, the grim purpose fueling him despite the nausea coiling in his stomach. He would find the anchor, the core, the place where its tendrils drew deepest. The stairwell terminated abruptly, not into a basement or a cellar, but a narrow, unadorned archway. The air here was still, utterly devoid of natural ventilation, yet it vibrated with a low, guttural thrum. Marcus stepped through, his boots crunching on a fine layer of dust and splintered wood. His flashlight beam cut through the black, revealing rows of decaying velvet seats, their stuffing spilling out like entrails. A towering, tattered screen dominated the far wall, its surface rippling faintly. This was it. The old cinema. He hadn't expected this. Not a vault, not a ritual chamber, but a place designed for observation, for spectacle. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. The projector, a monstrous contraption of tarnished brass and rust-eaten iron, stood silent and menacing in the center of the room, its single cyclopean lens aimed squarely at the screen. As Marcus approached, the low thrum intensified, becoming a rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the floorboards and up into his feet. Then, the screen flickered. A faint, ghostly luminescence emanated from its surface, then coalesced into images. He recognized some. The stoic gaze of a long-dead patriarch, the fearful eyes of a child mentioned in a forgotten diary. These were the former inhabitants, their memories, their very essences, playing out in a horrific, endless loop. The house wasn't just consuming, it was displaying. This was the mechanism, the feeding ground. The house didn't merely absorb, it extracted, processed, and then projected the stolen lives, a macabre performance for its own unseen, insatiable appetite. The realization was a devastating blow, a final, horrifying confirmation of his worst fears. He had come prepared. In his hand, he clutched a heavy, ornate brass candelabra, a relic he'd found in the manor's deepest archives, its base solid enough for a desperate act. He believed the house fed on the narrative of its inhabitants, on the active projection of their lives. Destroy the projector, destroy the screen, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could starve the entity. It wasn't a sound from the projection. It was a physical, auditory assault that ripped at his eardrums, echoing off the crumbling walls. The projected images on the screen contorted, faces twisting into silent screams, their features blurring as if melting. The seats around him began to groan, a chorus of tortured wood and straining springs, as if the entire room was convulsing. A new image flickered onto the screen, clearer than the rest, terrifyingly familiar. It was him. Marcus. His own face, pale and strained, superimposed over the spectral visages of the dead. He saw himself walking through the manor, reading documents, even sleeping. Then, his projected self began to change. He was watching himself being consumed, his identity unraveling before his very eyes. The house was showing him his future, his ending. His hands trembled, but his resolve solidified. This was the final battle, for his mind, for his identity, for his very life. With a guttural cry, he lunged towards the projector, the brass candelabra held high, its weight a desperate promise of destruction. The thrumming intensified, becoming a deafening roar, and the air around him grew impossibly heavy, pressing in, trying to crush him, to stop him, to make him another memory for its grotesque show. The faint light from above vanished, devoured by the spiraling descent. Marcus pressed his palm against the rough stone, the chill seeping into his bones, a deeper cold than mere temperature. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, cloying, like old pennies and congealed rust. The gloom wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical presence, a viscous fluid that coated his lungs with each shallow breath. He listened. The only sound was the scuff of his shoes, amplified and distorted, and the wet, rhythmic drip of water somewhere ahead. A sound that seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate beat. His determination, a cold, hard knot in his gut, was all that propelled him. He would find the core of this thing, this sentient structure, or he would cease to exist trying. The blurring lines between reality and nightmare had become his new normal, and within that chaos, a strange clarity had emerged. The house wanted him. Not just his memories, but his very essence, his consciousness. The steps abruptly ended. Marcus stumbled, catching himself against a wall that felt suddenly different. Not stone, but a damp, yielding plaster. The dripping sound intensified, echoing in a vast, unseen space. The metallic scent, once subtle, now burned his nostrils, mingled with an acrid, dusty sweetness. He took a cautious step forward, then another. His foot met a surface that was not stone, nor earth, but a crumbling, uneven floor. He brought his hands up, feeling around, and his fingers brushed against a torn, velvet-like fabric, then splintered wood. Then, a faint, sickly green luminescence bloomed ahead, just enough to outline the decay. He saw rows of broken, tattered seating, the velvet stripped and hanging in ribbons, the stuffing spilled like viscera. This wasn't a cellar or a dungeon. It was an old cinema. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a projector, a stage. It didn't just consume memories. It replayed them, twisted and distorted for its own unknown purpose. This was where the narratives were born, where lives were transformed into endless looping spectacles. The metallic tang in the air wasn't rust. It was the scent of old reels, the cloying sweetness, the decay of film, the dust, the accumulated remnants of countless forgotten audiences. He walked down the center aisle, the floorboards groaning under his weight like ancient bones. Each step was a desecration. The screen, a gaping maw of stained fabric, seemed to ripple as if holding a latent image. The house was the narrative. It crafted the story, cast the roles, and then absorbed the actors. All the previous inhabitants, all the legends, they weren't just memories. They were the house's continuous, never-ending feature presentation. And he, Marcus, was now the protagonist. He reached the front row, his hand brushing against a seat that crumbled under his touch. His eyes fixed on the screen. It was not blank. Faint, ethereal images flickered, like ghosts caught in the projector's beam. He saw fragments, a woman weeping in a forgotten parlor, a child's toy spinning across a grand hall, a man staring into a mirror with haunted eyes. It spoke of absorption, of becoming one with the narrative, of transcending the fragile boundaries of self. It promised an end to the struggle, a cessation of the terrifying uncertainty. It offered him a role, a permanent place in its eternal play, to cease fighting, to simply be, to become another ghost in the house's machine. It was a tempting oblivion. He had sought the truth, and he had found it. The house was a parasitic consciousness, a grand illusionist. Its power lay in its ability to consume and project, to make its victims believe in the reality of its stage. His jaw tightened. He would become the projectionist. He focused his will, not on fighting the house's power, but on understanding it. If it projected, could it not also be projected upon? If it created reality from memory, could he not create his own reality within its confines? The images on the screen intensified, becoming more vivid, more personal. The house was showing him his future, his absorption. But Marcus pushed back. He closed his eyes, not to block out the images, but to focus inward. He remembered the musty archives, the smell of old paper, the dry rustle of forgotten documents. He was not a character. He was an observer, a recorder. When he opened his eyes, the old cinema was still there, but something had shifted. The green luminescence flickered, less confident. He had not destroyed the house, nor had he escaped its physical grip. But he had created a small, unyielding pocket of his own reality, a core of self that the house could not immediately assimilate. He stood there, a solitary figure in the decaying old cinema, the house's endless narrative swirling around him. He was still within its walls, still subject to its projections, but he was no longer merely a spectator or a victim. He was a new element, an anomaly in its calculations. The house had absorbed countless others, but Marcus, through sheer force of will, had become something else. An active, conscious parasite within the parasite. The projector hummed, and Marcus, the historian, knew he was now a permanent living part of the show. A constant, unsettling presence in the heart of the house, endlessly watching, endlessly resisting, endlessly being.